We've got the F80 in the shop today, and I'm going to show you how to install some downpipes. So before we remove the downpipes, we're going to work on the top here first. So what we're going to do, we're going to remove all the covers, the charge pipes, and all that in order to remove the O2 sensors. The primary O2 sensors, only way you're going to be able to remove them is by removing all the stuff from the top. You can technically unscrew them from the actual stock downpipes themselves, but I don't recommend it because you're going to twist and you're going to put a lot of strain on those wires, and you don't want to do that. So we're going to just take all this stuff off. In that, I mean, we're going to take off the carbon fiber brace. In order to take the carbon fiber brace off, we're going to take off some of these plastics. My engine bay might be a little bit different than yours because we have this whole air ride system on here, but you get the gist of it. We're going to take off all the covers, even the engine cover, charge pipes, the lower engine cover, and then we'll have access to those O2 sensors. We need to remove these plastic covers. You're going to have a push pin here, so make sure you pull that off first. And then you're going to have these 3 10mm plastic screw kind of things. So what you're going to do, you're going to just rotate them counterclockwise about 90 degrees. Once you have them rotated 90 degrees, then you can lift up and pull it right out. It's the same thing on this side. You have a push pin right here, and then you have these plastic screws that you need to rotate 90 degrees. To remove this carbon fiber brace, you have to remove 2 13mm bolts right here. Then you have 3 E12, so that's external Torx 12 bolts on each side of the strut bar. And also don't forget the 10mm for the expansion tank. Now remove this vanity cover, it lifts right up. To remove this airbox, we're going to disconnect the map sensor first. So I'll push the tab in and it'll pull right out. We're also going to be removing this lower engine cover. So we're going to get this map sensor connector out of the way first. So in order to do that, you need to either remove this entire tab or just pry this section apart. Then you could pull the connector out. Same thing goes for this one right here. We're going to be removing this intake boot clamp right here. You can use a flathead or a 6mm socket. You're probably going to be better off using an extension with the 6mm socket so you can get enough access. Now we're just going to lift up on this airbox assembly, and it should pop right out of this air intake duct as well as this housing right here. So here are the grommets that airbox was sitting in. One right here, and here is the air duct that it clips into. This would also be a good time to replace your air filter and do the same on the other side as well. Next, we're going to remove these charge pipes. So you can use a flathead or a 6mm socket for these hose clamps right here. We just need to remove the one that's closest to the cooler, this one, and that one. And then we're also going to remove the E10 bolts, so they're external Torx 10 bolts. One right here, and the second one right here. Now a quick tip for any of you doing this at home, make sure you cover up all of the holes that you're uncovering because you don't want anything falling in there. Once you have both of these clamps loosened, don't forget about this cable right here, which is attached to this charge pipe. When you're pulling this off, you're going to have to release it from this clamp right here. First, let's take off the rest of the bolts. Now we're going to pull the charge pipes off of the charge cooler so we can lift it up and off of the grommets. Now you're going to have to finesse these a little bit, but they should pop right out. This is where that E10 bolt was. Here's the rubber grommet, and here is the clamp that goes to the charge cooler. Now this is one expensive piece of plastic right here. But fear not, there are a lot of upgrades for this. which we'll probably do in the future. Here's where that E10 bolt was. Here's the rubber grommet. And here's the clamp for the charge cooler. And now we have 4 more holes to cover up. One right here, one down there, and these 2. We're gonna pull this lower engine cover off to unveil the O2 sensor connectors. They're just pushed in just like that upper engine cover. You wanna lift up one right here, one in the back corner, and one in this back corner. Now remember, always maintenance before mods. If you're installing downpipes on your engine, chances are you need to change your spark plugs as well, so go ahead and do that. Now we can see how this O2 sensor is routed. You can see his metal clips. You want to pull it out of there. Up here. Now we can unclip it from here. And then to disconnect the connector, now one thing you might want to do is you might want to mark these connectors because the O2 sensors do only plug in one way. So you can just mark one of these. There's a second one behind there for the second downpipe. So we're just going to mark this one right here, and the second one will just disconnect and we'll know which one's marked. Now in order to disconnect the O2 sensor, you need to pull out this tab right here first. Once you have that tab pulled out, then you can push down and it will release. So you just push down on that silver tab and it will pop right out. Now we're going to do the same thing to the second one that's back here. To get it unclipped, all you really need to do is you need to lift up this metal tab right here and this whole connector will pop right out. Now it's the same thing for the second O2 sensor. Pull the silver tab out. You can just use your nail for this. And you'll hear it click in place when it's fully out. And then you push it down. And if you follow this connector further down, you'll see other metal clamps holding it in place. So just try to feed it out of those metal clamps. We're going to push these other connectors from the engine harness up here. That way they're not in the way. Now you can see another metal clip down here. And then you just got to feel for the other one, which is further down. Now we've got this O2 sensor completely free. There's 2 metal clamps holding in place, one right here and one further down that you need to feel for. You just want to lift up this first section right here, this top section, and that will release the actual wire itself. And the same goes for this one right here. You just want to release these clamps. You just want to lift it up and pull the wire out. And now that's it for the top section. Now we can finally lift the car up and work on the bottom. Now that we're underneath the car, there's a couple ways you can go about replacing just your downpipes. So you can actually just remove sections of the exhaust, so where it attaches to the downpipe, and just one mount right here. And then you'll be able to just let this whole exhaust system dangle. But what I'm going to show you how to remove this entire exhaust, just in case you need to do that for anything else. So in order to remove the downpipes, you have to remove 4 actual nuts right here, and then 2 screws or bolts, whatever you want to call them, that attach to this flange right here that attaches to the downpipes. So we're going to remove these 4 nuts. Then we're going to keep going further down to this first exhaust mount. Now this mount is held in by these 2 E10 bolts. Then we need to remove this plate right here to remove the entire exhaust, which is held in by 6 hex bolts, 3 on each side. You don't need to remove the entire braces on each side. You just got to remove the bolts that we can slide out this middle section right here. Now we're going to go further down, and we've got 2 more mounts right here. This mount right here is held in with another nut and an 8mm screw. And on the driver's side, we just have this 1 nut. Now we get to the muffler section. So the muffler has 2 OEM valves that you need to disconnect first. So you just take off the connector, and you also have a mount on each side. Now these mounts are held in with 13mm nuts, and there's 2 of them on each side. Now once you have all that stuff off, now this is where you might need a helper to actually remove the entire exhaust system. Now a quick tip for anybody doing this at home, especially all of you East Coast guys, soak this stuff with some PB Blaster or any kind of penetrant. And another tip, you want to actually take off as much of the corrosion and dirt and stuff on these exhaust studs as much as you can before you spray it with the penetrant so it can actually get in there. So I've got all of this stuff soaking for a couple hours and we should be good to actually pull these off. Look at all that rust just fall right off. Now these 2 bolts, those will actually come off after we pull the rest of the exhaust off. With the exhaust out of the way, now we just have these 2 screws or bolts. They're T30. This one's pretty rusty, this one's not too bad. We'll see how it comes off. Oh, came right out. Now the only thing that's holding this in place are these donut gaskets. And you can see these actually separated quite a bit, which is why I always recommend replacing all of these exhaust gaskets. You know, a lot of people say you can reuse some of these exhaust gaskets if they're not cracked or if they're not really worn. But I always like to replace all the exhaust gaskets because nobody likes an exhaust gas leak. It stinks, sounds a little weird, and even if you don't hear it, people outside will definitely hear it. So always replace these gaskets, especially these downpipe gaskets when we're about to pull these downpipes off. And one thing, most downpipes that you buy, aftermarket ones, or even the OEM ones, they're not gonna come with new gaskets, so you have to go out of your way to buy them. But guess what? All of that All of that stuff will be linked down below, so make sure you check out all the links in the description box. Okay, the whole flange came off. The way this flange works, what's called a donut gasket, so it looks like a donut, right, with the hole in the middle, and when this flange compresses with the rest of the exhaust flange, that donut gets squished. So just think about squishing a donut, right? It's just gonna spread out, and that's what causes the seal. Now that we got all the easy stuff out of the way, we're gonna remove this under shield. So this is an aluminum tray, it's held in with a bunch of 16mm bolts, and quite a few 8mm bolts and screws as well. We're gonna remove all of the 8mm screws all around here first, and then we're gonna remove these 16s. Once all the bolts and screws are removed, you wanna slide it towards the back of the car, and then it's gonna drop right down. To make it a little bit easier on us, we're gonna remove this under tray as well. It's just held in with a bunch of 8mm screws all along the side of it and around it. And there is a 10mm nut on the back. That's a plastic nut, so you want to be careful so you don't strip it. Now before we start removing the downpipes, we're going to disconnect the last 2 O2 sensors. We're just going to mark one of them with that same paint marker. That way we know which orientation it goes in. And these are also held in the same way with this metal tab. You just want to pull the metal tab back, they pop right out. And these also disconnect the same way. You want to remove this gray tab first, push it out with your fingernail. Once you have it pushed out, you just push the actual tab in, and then it'll separate. Now you want to do the same thing as we did on the top. You want to get it out of all of those metal holders, and you want to make sure you remember how it's routed. So there's one metal clip right here that holds them in place. But if you follow this one up, you're going to see there's another metal tab up there. You want to get it disconnected from there. Now you can see we have both of them disconnected completely. And now we can get on with removing the actual downpipes. So downpipes are actually held in with some V-band clamps. And V-band clamps are the best kind of clamps because it's just one bolt or nut that you loosen up, and then the whole clamp opens up, and then you can pull off that whole downpipe. So in our case, those V-band clamps are held in with a 13mm bolt. So your best friend is gonna be one of these flex head gear ratcheting wrenches. So this is a 13 millimeter, and that's the size of those V-band bolts. So we're gonna remove the one that's closest to the passenger side first. Let me show you guys where it's at. It's gonna be a little bit tricky, but I'm gonna show you as it is now, and then you'll probably get a better picture once we actually have it pulled off. So if you look through this opening between the passenger engine mount on this subframe, you'll see the 13 millimeter bolt right here. This 13 millimeter bolt right here. And you can see right here is a passenger. This is a passenger engine mount. Now still on the passenger side, here's the power steering rack. If you go through this opening right here, you can see this other 13 millimeter bolt. And that is for the other downpipe. Now I've got some skinny arms and skinny hands, so I can fit in there pretty well. If you can't use one of those ratchety wrenches, you can also use just an extension with a swivel socket, and you'll be able to get right on it. Now if you live up north or on the East Coast and it's very rusty, make sure you spray that down with some PB Blaster as well. Now you can see right here, we've got some 10 millimeter nuts on these studs right here. Now these are just brackets to hold these downpipes in place so they don't rattle around. So we're gonna loosen this 10 millimeter nut, and that's gonna release this downpipe right here. You can push that whole bolt completely out. We also have this O2 sensor that's wrapped in this heat shield that's held into this bracket up here. So we're gonna release it from the bracket, and that's gonna allow us to drop this whole downpipe. We're gonna try to remove this downpipe all the way close to the passenger side first, and try to drop that once we get that V-band clamp released and this O2 sensor released. Now here's the O2 sensor that we removed from the top, and here's the O2 sensor that we removed from the bottom of the car. Now it's the same thing for this downpipe. That same 13 millimeter bolt that I showed you on that V-band clamp, we're gonna remove it all the way. Once you have that bolt removed all the way, you might have to tap or pry against the V-band clamp to let it separate. So this is what the V-band clamp looks like. And what happens is there's a bolt that goes through here, that 13 millimeter bolt, that screws into this. So once you have the bolt removed all the way, chances are this is still gonna be clamped really, really tight. So what you need to do is you need to pry against these two with the bolt removed. Once you pry it open, it's gonna open up, and you can wiggle the downpipe at the same time. And once you're wiggling that downpipe, it'll release from this. Then once you have this clamp opened up all the way, it'll come out from in between. Now, if your V-band clamp is really, really rusty and that bolt is also really, really rusty, I highly suggest that you replace it. And it's always good practice to replace the gasket that goes between the two downpipes, which I'll show you guys later when we put in the new downpipes on. Now it's all about finessing that downpipe out. It's very tight. If you're gonna put this stock one back on, I'm pretty sure you're gonna have to lift up the engine just a little bit off of this passenger side mount in order to get it all the way up through there. Because all of these brackets and all of these heat shields, they're all in the way. To pull it out is not that difficult because it's not gonna catch on it. You just gotta tug on it. Keep wiggling it and it'll come right out. So before we can start reassembly, there's a few things that we have to do. For the downpipes, we have to actually transfer over all of the O2 sensors to each downpipe. And when you're pulling these off, you don't want to touch the tip of this at all. You don't get any oils or anything on it. And this is just going to be a 22 millimeter oxygen sensor wrench, or you could use an open-ended wrench like I did. So before we can install the new downpipes, I like to replace all of the gaskets. The gasket that comes on the downpipe is actually installed into the turbo. So you can see it's right around this whole edge. We can remove this V-band clamp, and you can see the whole gasket. It sits inside of this groove right here. So we're gonna pull the old one out, put the new one in, do the same thing for both turbos, and then we're ready to put the downpipes back on. So we're going to start off with the long one. So now you can see how I've got it routed in for the most part. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and attach this bracket that goes to hold this downpipe in place, so we can guide it in to that V-band clamp at the turbo. So this is just this is the one that came from factory. Now we're going to line up that downpipe into the turbo, and you can see that V-band clamp. So that V-band clamp is going to go around both of the flanges, the turbo flange and that downpipe flange. And then we can put the bolt that we took out earlier and put that bolt all the way through that clamp and let it squeeze down. So I cleaned up this whole mid plate and got it installed on here. The downpipes are still very loose, they're just in place. Once we have all of this lined up with the rest of the exhaust, then we can tighten down the V-band clamps, route all of the O2 sensors properly, and even get this bracket for this downpipe secured as well. So here's a new gasket. I'll have the link down below. So this gasket has a cone shape to it on one side, and the other side is completely flat. So you want the flat side to go against this flange right here on the downpipe, and you just want to slide it in place. I'm leaving these two bolts a little loose. That way, once we have everything else lined up properly, everything can be, exactly where it needs to be, and we can tighten both of these with an Allen key or a hex socket after everything else is back on. So we got all four of these nuts tightened down to the downpipes, as well as these two hex screws. Now, since we're installing this entire exhaust system, that's why we did it this way. If you had, your stock exhaust, or you already had another exhaust system, and you were only just replacing these downpipes, what you would do is you would get the exhaust, if you didn't take it off all the way, get it lined back up, get it attached to these downpipes, tighten down the nuts. Once all this stuff is tightened down right here, then we can scoot further up and tie in the V-band clamps on the downpipe to the turbo. So I got both of those tied-in. Once again, those are 13 millimeter bolts, and those V-band clamps, you just want to make sure they're around both flanges, sandwiching them together. And you can actually rotate the V-band clamp around to make sure you're on there before you start tightening it. Now do that for both, and obviously you want to make sure you're accessible to that bolt. Orient the V-band however you need it to, so you can get enough access to tighten it down. And I just use one of these gear flex head wrenches, and it just makes your life a whole lot easier. Now that we've got all that stuff tightened, let's go in and route these O2 sensors. So you can see right here on this O2 sensor, there's this metal section. And this metal section needs to sit inside of this clamp that's already on this bell housing area. So all we need to do is we just need to route it and push it straight in there. Now you can see I have got this O2 sensor put into the clamp. And the same goes for the other one, which is down here. With both of those secure, now we can route these wires. There's other clamps like this. There's two of them that you need to route it through. So you can see this top one up here. There's one up here, and there's a second one down here. Two go through here, and one goes through the top one. And now we can actually plug it in the way that we had marked it. So you can see this one has this white paint stuff that I put on it. Same with this one. Once you hear the click, push this in as well, and that locks it in place. And now you can see from right here, you want to route this cable through this, and then we're going to snap the O2 sensor connector in place. Now we're back in the engine bay, and now we're going to have a little bit of difficulty in terms of routing the O2 sensor wires. So it's not going to be exactly the same as it was, mainly because the orientation and the location of the O2 sensors on the aftermarket downpipes are going to be a little bit different. And depending on which downpipes you go with, there's going to be a little bit more variation in between whichever downpipes you're installing. So for us, I've got it routed this way. You can see this O2 sensor coming in from the downpipe. Got it going around this, through this holder right here, going straight through the top to the other holder slash clamp on the valve cover. And there's one more right here that's gonna sit inside of there. First, we're gonna go ahead and plug in this O2 sensor. We also have this one marked with some paint before we had taken it apart. Belongs to that. So let's get it connected. Once it's pushed in, make sure you lock it. And for the O2 sensor that's coming through the back, that one we had to pull up from underneath. So now you can see this clamp back here, which is at the back of the engine, and it's on top of this heat shield right here. So we've got the O2 sensor slid through that clamp, and as you come further up, there's another clamp right here, and it comes up through the top. And we're going to go ahead and plug this one in as well, lock it, and then we can secure it into the holder for the O2 sensor. Now you just want to double check, make sure the O2 sensor wires are not in the way of any moving parts, like the wastegates down here. You want to make sure it's not touching or touching the turbo directly, because we don't want them to melt. And that's that. That's the downpipes installed. Now we just need to put the tubes and all that stuff back together. All right, so now let's put the airbox, covers, and the strut bar, all that stuff back together since we have everything else done. And then we can finally see how these downpipes sound. All right, now we can pull out these towels. So now we're going to reinstall the charge pipes. We're going to put the back one on first, which is the shorter one. And you're also going to need these external Torx 10 bolts as well. Now when you're putting these on, you want to make sure you have this secure on both sides. There's one. And when you're putting the actual charge pipe onto the turbo section, you want to make sure it sits down properly and the hole is lined up for the bolt. It's an external Torx 10. Now next up we have the airbox. Only thing you want to be careful with the airbox is this section right here. It slides into the air duct that's down here. So you want to make sure that lines up, and then the rest of the grommets, there's a grommet right here. And there's a grommet down here. And those two need to go into the chassis right here. And you want to make sure you line this intake boot up to this right here. Now this clamp only goes in one certain spot. There's two grooves on the boot itself. So make sure you have the clamp seated properly, and then you can go in and tighten that down. And you want to make sure these boots for the charge pipes are all the way down as well. Make sure they bottom out, and then we're going to go ahead and tighten up these clamps as well. Now once again, all of these clamps are either 6mm socket or you can use a flathead. Plug the mass airflow sensor back in and route the cable. The upper cover can go back on. This just has grommets. And you just want to push it down right on those grommets. Those grommets go onto these little nipple looking things. Next up is the strut bar. Now we have all these external Torx bolts and one 10mm bolt for the expansion tank. And we have the two 13s in the middle. Put the plastic covers back on. You want to make sure they slide in. And if you have a push pin, there's going to be a push pin right here. And these, you just want to twist them 90 degrees and they should lock in place. Same thing goes for this side. You want to slide in the middle section first. If you have your push pin, it goes in right here. And these three 10mm plastic fasteners, you just twist them 90 degrees. And each one of these fasteners has an arrow, and the actual trim piece also has an arrow. So when those two arrows line up, that means that it's secure and fastened. Now the final step is to put all of the covers, the under tray, all that stuff back on. So we're going to start with this one right here. This one's held in with a bunch of 8mm screws and one 10mm nut. The 10mm nut goes all the way here in the back. And then we have all these 8mm screws. But that concludes our downpipe install on this F80 M3. As you saw, the process was very straightforward and simple. You want to make sure you're getting all those new gaskets, nuts, and all of that as well. And depending on the downpipes you go with, you want to check the reviews on those. Ones that I use were made by Stone Exhaust along with the entire exhaust system. I'll have a full install and review video on that. That'll be linked down below. So if you guys are interested in these downpipes, make sure you check that out. Besides that, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you guys for watching. You guys are the best. I'll see you guys in the next one.